$1 million. That was the price tag Damon King put on my womb. He sat across from me in his pristine glass office and slid a cashier's check across the mahogany desk like he was tipping a waitress. He looked at me with those cold, dead eyes and told me to take the money and forget I ever had a son. He thought because I was struggling that I would sell my child for a comfortable life. But he made one fatal calculation. He didn't know that the woman scrubbing his floors was the only person on earth who knew where the bodies were buried. And I wasn't going to take his money. I was going to take everything else. Welcome to Black Women's Soul Stories. You just heard the offer, a billionaire trying to buy a mother's silence. But he forgot that a mother's love isn't for sale, and neither is her dignity. Today's story is about turning the tables and taking back the power. If you believe that the underdog deserves the crown, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now. Join our community of queens who refuse to stay silent. Now, let's go back to the night where it all began, inside the gilded cage of the King estate. The pain in my feet had moved beyond a dull ache and settled into a sharp, rhythmic throb that pulsed with every beat of my heart. I adjusted the heavy silver tray balanced on my left hand, ensuring the crystal champagne flutes didn't slide as I navigated the crowded ballroom. The air smelled of expensive perfume, roasted duck, and old money. It was a scent I had grown to despise over the last 3 years. To the 300 guests filling the gilded hall of the King estate, I was nothing more than a pair of hands holding a drink or a uniform to be ignored. I kept my head down, my eyes fixed on the polished marble floor, dodging tuxedo shoes and trailing silk gowns. Invisibility was my armor. If I remained invisible, no one would ask why a woman with a master's degree in data analytics was serving hors d'oeuvres for minimum wage plus tips. No one would ask about the gap in my resume or the blacklisting that had shattered my career. And most importantly, no one would ask about Leo. My son was the only reason I was here. I closed my eyes for a brief second, conjuring his face. Leo was 6 years old, obsessed with space rockets, and possessed a smile that could light up the darkest corners of our cramped, drafty apartment. He needed braces. He needed new sneakers. He needed a tutor for his reading. The stack of bills on my kitchen counter was a mountain I climbed every day but never seemed to conquer. This catering gig at Damon King's annual charity gala was supposed to be the windfall I needed. The agency promised triple pay because of the high-profile nature of the host. If I could just survive 2 more hours without spilling a drink or collapsing from exhaustion, I could pay the rent and maybe, just maybe, buy Leo that telescope he had been begging for. "Excuse me." A deep, gravelly voice cut through the ambient noise of the party. I froze, instinctively pulling the tray closer to my chest. I turned to see a man standing to my left. He wasn't a guest. He was wearing a dark suit that fit too perfectly to be off the rack, but he lacked the festive tie or the relaxed demeanor of the wealthy attendees. He wore an earpiece, the coiled wire disappearing into his collar. His hands were clasped in front of him, and his eyes were devoid of any warmth. This was security, high-level security. Mr. King requires a fresh bottle of the 1942 vintage in his private study, the man said. His voice was low, designed not to cause a scene, but it carried the weight of an order that could not be refused. I nodded quickly, forcing a polite smile. "I will let the bar manager know immediately, sir." The man stepped sideways, blocking my path to the bar. "No." Mr. King specifically requested the server working the East Wing section. He pointed a finger at me. "That is you." A cold knot formed in the pit of my stomach. Why would a billionaire tech mogul specifically request a waitress he had never met? Paranoia, a constant companion since I lost my corporate job, flared up. Had I done something wrong? Had I been too slow? Had I looked a guest in the eye, in this world, the whims of the powerful could end your livelihood in a heartbeat. I couldn't afford to lose this job. I swallowed the lump of fear in my throat and nodded. Of course. I will get the bottle. The bartender handed me the heavy bottle with a look of pity. Be careful up there, Nia, he whispered as he placed it on my tray. The air is thin at the top. I took the service elevator to the 3rd floor. The noise of the jazz band and the chatter of the crowd faded away, replaced by a heavy, oppressive silence. The hallway was wide enough to drive a car through, lined with portraits of stern-looking ancestors and modern art pieces that looked like violent splashes of red paint. I walked toward the double mahogany doors at the end of the corridor, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I told myself to calm down. It was just a drink. I would pour the champagne, keep my eyes down, and leave. I raised my hand to knock, but before my knuckles could graze the wood, the voice came from inside, "Enter." I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The study was a testament to masculine power. Walls of dark wood, shelves filled with leather-bound books that looked like they had never been read, and a fireplace large enough to roast a whole deer. But my eyes were drawn immediately to the man standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, Damon King. He was looking out at the sprawling grounds of his estate, his back to me. Even from behind, he was intimidating. He was tall, his shoulders broad and tense beneath his suit jacket. He radiated a kind of restless energy, like a predator pacing in a cage. He turned slowly. I had seen his face on the cover of Forbes and in the background of news reports about ruthless mergers, but seeing him in person was different. He was devastatingly handsome, with skin the color of deep espresso and eyes that were sharp, intelligent, and utterly cold. He didn't look at the champagne bottle. He looked directly at me. "Put it on the desk," he said. I walked across the Persian rug, the plush fibers swallowing the sound of my cheap shoes. I set the tray down on the massive ebony desk, my hands trembling slightly. I tried to pour the drink, but he raised a hand to stop me. "Leave it. Sit down, Nia." The sound of my name on his lips felt like a violation. I froze, the bottle hovering over the glass. "Sir, I really should get back to the floor. The agency is very strict about protocols." "I own the agency," Damon interrupted smoothly. "And I own the catering company. And I own the building your little apartment is in. So when I tell you to sit, you sit." The threat was casual, delivered with the same tone one might use to order coffee. My legs felt weak. He knew who I was. He knew where I lived. The knot in my stomach tightened into a ball of dread. I lowered myself into the leather chair opposite his desk, perched on the edge as if ready to bolt. Damon walked to a side table and poured a glass of water from a crystal pitcher. He brought it over and placed it in front of me. "You look pale, dehydrated. Drink this." I shook my head. "I'm fine, sir. Drink it." It wasn't a suggestion. His eyes locked onto mine, daring me to disobey. I was terrified. If I angered him, what would he do? Evict me? Fire me? I reached out and took the glass. My hand shook so badly the water rippled. I took a small sip, the cool liquid sliding down my dry throat. It tasted slightly metallic, but I assumed it was just expensive mineral water. "Why am I here?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Damon leaned against the edge of his desk, crossing his arms over his chest. He studied me like a specimen under a microscope. "I have been watching you for a long time, Nia. I know about your degree. I know about the harassment suit you filed against your former boss and how he destroyed your reputation to cover his tracks. I know you are brilliant, desperate, and alone." I felt naked, exposed. How could he know all that? "And I know about Leo," he added softly. The name hit me like a physical blow. I stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Do not talk about my son." Damon didn't flinch, he just watched me. "Sit down, Nia. The water is kicking in. You're going to want to be seated." Panic surged through me. I looked at the glass in my hand, then back at him. "What did you do? What did you give me?" "Just a mild sedative," he said calmly. to ensure we can have this conversation without you running away. I tried to move towards the door, but my legs felt like they were made of lead. The room tilted violently to the left. I stumbled, gripping the edge of the desk to keep from falling. My vision blurred, the edges turning gray. Why? I slurred. My tongue felt thick and heavy in my mouth. Damon moved towards me, catching me by the arm as my knees buckled. He guided me back into the chair, his grip firm but not painful. Because I need him, Nia. I made a donation years ago, an anonymous contribution to a fertility clinic. It was a failsafe, a backup plan. I never intended to use it, but circumstances have changed. My grandfather's will requires an heir, a blood heir. I stared at him, my mind struggling to process his words through the fog that was rapidly consuming my brain. The clinic, the desperate hope I had felt sitting in that sterile waiting room 6 years ago, the file number, the donor profile that listed high intelligence and perfect health but no name. You, I whispered. You are the father, biologically, yes, Damon said. His voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. And now I am claiming what is mine. No, I moaned, fighting the darkness. He's mine, you can't have him. I won't just take him, Damon said, his face swimming before my eyes. I will pay you, but you need to sleep now. When you wake up, we will discuss the price. I tried to scream, to fight, to scratch his eyes out, but my body had shut down. My head lolled back against the leather. The last thing I saw was Damon King looking at his watch, as if the destruction of my life was just another appointment on his calendar. Then everything went black. The first thing I noticed was the silence. My apartment was never silent. There was always sound of traffic, the neighbors arguing through thin walls or the hum of the refrigerator, but this silence was heavy, thick, and expensive. I opened my eyes. I was lying in a bed that felt like a cloud. The sheets were silk, cool against my skin. Sunlight streamed through massive windows, illuminating a room that was bigger than my entire apartment. I shot up, gasping. The memories of the night before crashed into me. The water, the drug, Damon, Leo. I threw the covers off. I wasn't in my uniform anymore. I was wearing a silk nightgown that I had never seen before. The realization that he had undressed me or had someone undress me made bile rise in my throat. I ignored the dizziness that still lingered and ran to the door. It was locked. I pounded on the heavy wood with both fists. Open this door. Let me out. Where is my son? The lock clicked instantly. The door swung open, revealing the same security guard from the party. He stood like a statue, blocking the hallway. Mr. King is waiting for you on the terrace, he said. I didn't wait for him to escort me. I pushed past him, my bare feet slapping against the cold marble floor of the hallway. I ran down the grand staircase, ignoring the maids who stopped dusting to stare at me. I saw the glass doors leading to the back patio and burst through them. Damon was sitting at a glass table, sipping coffee and reading a newspaper. He looked fresh, rested, and immaculately dressed in a white linen suit. He didn't look like a kidnapper. He looked like a king holding court. Where is he? I screamed. If you have hurt a hair on his head, I will burn this house to the ground with you inside it. Damon lowered the newspaper slowly. He gestured to the empty chair across from him. Good morning, Nia. Please sit. There is no need for hysterics. I marched up to the table and slammed my hands down, rattling the silverware. Where is my son? He is at school, Damon said calmly. My head of security dropped him off this morning. I have a team watching him. He is perfectly safe, probably safer than he has ever been in that neighborhood of yours. The threat was subtle, but it sliced through me like a knife. He had my son. He had control. I felt the strength drain out of my legs and I sank into the chair, clutching the edges of the table to steady myself. What do you want? I asked, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and terror. Damon reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thin rectangular piece of paper. He slid it across the glass table. It was a check. I looked at the numbers. 1 followed by 6 zeros, $1 million. I stared at it. It was enough money to solve every problem I had ever had. It was freedom, it was safety. Take it, Damon said softly. This is the offer, $1 million. In exchange, you sign full custody of Leo over to me. You disappear, you can go anywhere in the world, start over, be young again. Live a life without burdens. What burdens? He called my son a burden. He called the light of my life, the boy who hugged me when I cried, the boy who drew me pictures of rocket ships, a burden. The air around me seemed to freeze. The sounds of the birds in the garden faded away. I looked at Damon King. I really looked at him. I saw the arrogance in the set of his jaw. I saw the emptiness in his eyes. He thought money was the only currency that mattered. He thought because I was poor, I was for sale. He thought because I was a woman, I was weak. He had no idea who he was dealing with. He didn't know that I had clawed my way out of poverty once before. He didn't know that my mind was a weapon sharper than any lawyer he could hire. I reached out and picked up the check. The paper felt crisp. Damon's lips curled into a faint, triumphant smile. He thought he had won. I looked him in the eye. No, I tore the check down the middle. Then I tore it again, and again. I let the pieces fall onto his pristine breakfast table like confetti. Damon's smile vanished. His face hardened into stone. You are making a foolish mistake, Nia. I have lawyers who can prove you are unfit. I have judges in my pocket. I can take him from you and leave you with nothing. You will end up in jail, and Leo will grow up hating you. I leaned forward. My fear was gone, replaced by a cold, burning clarity. You can try, I said, my voice steady and low. But you have a problem, Damon. You need an heir immediately to secure your grandfather's money. If you go to court, it will take months, maybe years. The press will find out. They will find out you bought a child. They will find out about the drugs. They will find out about the coercion. Your stock price will plummet. You will lose the very company you are trying to save. His eyes narrowed. He didn't speak. I had hit a nerve. You need a mother, I continued. You need the image of a happy, stable family to present to your board. You can't just produce a 6-year-old boy out of thin air. You need me to validate you. So here is the counter offer. I stood up, pulling the silk robe tighter around me. I stay. I move into this house. We tell the world we are co-parenting. I help Leo adjust to this new life. I stay close to my son. And in exchange, I don't go to the police and tell them you kidnapped me. Damon stood up, towering over me. His fists were clenched at his sides. You want to live in my house. You want to challenge me in my own home. I don't want to be anywhere near you, I spat. But I will not sell my son. Those are the terms. Take them, or I walk out of here and scream until every news camera in the city is parked at your front gate. We stared at each other for a long moment, the billionaire and the waitress. He was searching for a crack in my resolve, a sign of weakness, but I thought of Leo and I became granite. Fine, Damon hissed, you can stay, but do not think for a second that this makes us partners. You are a guest, a temporary inconvenience. You will follow my rules. You will not embarrass me. And if you cross me, Nia, I will destroy you. He turned and stormed back into the house, shattering the morning calm. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. My hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from adrenaline. I looked up at the massive mansion looming over me. It was a fortress of glass and steel. It was a prison, but Damon King had made a fatal error. He had invited me in. He thought he was trapping me, but he had just given me access. Somewhere in that house were his secrets. Somewhere on his private servers was the evidence of who he really was. He wanted a war for custody. I was going to give him a war for his empire. The iron gates of the King estate closed behind us with a heavy metallic clang that sounded final, like a prison cell locking for the night. I sat in the back of the black SUV, my arm wrapped tightly around Leo. He was asleep, his head resting heavily against my ribcage, his small hand clutching the strap of his worn-out Spider-Man backpack. He looked so peaceful, completely unaware that his mother had just sold her soul to the devil to keep him safe. I looked out the tinted window as the car wound its way up the long driveway. The mansion loomed ahead, a sprawling beast of glass and stone illuminated by floodlights. To the world, this was a palace. To me, it was a battlefield. Damon had been true to his word in the coldest way possible. Within 2 hours of our agreement on the terrace, a team of movers had packed up our small apartment. They didn't ask what I wanted to keep. They just boxed everything up and loaded it into a truck. I felt a pang of shame as I watched them handle our meager possessions. The scratched coffee table, the mismatched plates, the second-hand toys. It was a stark reminder of the gap between Damon's world and mine. The car stopped in front of the main entrance. The driver, a silent man with a neck as thick as a tree trunk, opened the door. He told me that my quarters were in the West Wing and that Mr. King had requested I use the side entrance so as not to disturb the evening guests. Of course, the side entrance. I was the mother of his heir, but I wasn't welcome at the front door. I woke Leo gently. He rubbed his eyes, blinking in the harsh lights, and asked if this was the castle. I forced a smile, swallowing the lump in my throat. I told him yes, this was the castle, and we were going on an adventure. We were escorted to a guest house connected by a glass walkway. It was beautiful, undeniably. The floors were heated marble, the furniture was modern and sleek, and the kitchen was stocked with food that cost more than my monthly grocery budget, but it felt sterile. There were no pictures on the walls, no warmth. It felt like a display case in a museum. After I tucked Leo into a bed that was too big for him, I walked into the living area. I needed to think. I needed a plan. I reached for my phone to call the one person I trusted, my old friend Sarah, who worked at a legal aid clinic. I dialed her number, my hands shaking. Sarah answered, her voice groggy with sleep. I told her I needed a lawyer, a real one, a shark. I told her I was at the King estate and that Damon King was Leo's father. There was a long silence on the other end. Sarah warned me that I couldn't fight Damon King legally. She told me his firm donated to every major law partner in the city and that he played golf with the family court judge. She said if I tried to sue him now, he would bury me in paperwork and take Leo anyway. She told me to survive, to keep my head down, and to find a weakness from the inside. The next morning, the reality of my new life set in. I dressed Leo in his best clothes, and we were summoned to breakfast in the main dining room. As we walked through the long corridors, I told Leo to hold my hand tight. We entered the dining room, a cavernous space with a table long enough to seat 20 people. Damon sat at the head of the table, tapping furiously on his tablet, ignoring us. But he wasn't alone. Sitting to his right was a woman who looked like she had walked straight out of a fashion magazine. She had sleek blonde hair and a white dress tailored to perfection. She was sipping a green smoothie, scanning me with pure disgust. Damon introduced her as Vanessa, his fiancée. Vanessa didn't smile. She just stared at Leo as if he were a stain on the tablecloth. She commented coldly that he didn't look like Damon and questioned the accuracy of the DNA test. Damon dismissed her, stating simply that Leo was the heir and that was all that mattered. Vanessa scoffed, criticizing Leo's clothes and worrying about how he would look at the upcoming gala. I defended my son, but Vanessa snapped back. She told me I was a necessary evil, a glorified nanny, and that I shouldn't mistake my proximity for status. She called me the help. I wanted to scream, but Leo squeezed my leg under the table. He was scared. I swallowed my pride and focused on cutting his pancakes. As the days turned into a week, I realized Vanessa wasn't just mean. She was systematic. She isolated me, instructing the staff not to speak to me. But the worst part was watching Damon ignore Leo. One evening, Leo drew a picture of a rocket ship labeled Dad and tried to show it to Damon. Damon didn't even crouch down. He just muttered that it was nice and told Leo to go to his room because he had work to do. Seeing my son's face crumble broke my heart. The rage I felt wasn't just about custody anymore. It was about the cruelty. I realized I couldn't just survive here. I had to fight back. Late that night, I slipped out of the guest wing. I found myself in the main hallway near Damon's study. I heard a low, electric hum coming from inside. I pushed the door open a fraction of an inch. The room was dark, lit only by the blinking lights of a server rack in the corner. A private, localized server. I crept in. I saw a sticky note on the monitor with an IP address, 192.168.40.88. I memorized it instantly. Suddenly, I heard footsteps. Vanessa appeared in the doorway. She caught me. She kicked my hand away as I pretended to look for a lost earring. She warned me that if she caught me snooping again, she would frame me for theft and have me thrown out, keeping Leo for herself. I ran back to my room, terrified. But she had made a mistake. She thought she had scared me, but she had just confirmed that there was something in that room worth hiding. I had spent the last hour digging through the cardboard boxes stacked in the corner, the ones Damon's movers had dumped here like trash. Buried at the bottom of a box labeled bedroom, I found my old lifeline, my battered laptop. The blue light of the laptop screen was the only thing keeping me sane. It washed over my face, a cool digital balm for the burning anger in my chest. My fingers flew across the keyboard. It was a rhythm I hadn't felt in 3 years. For the last few years, my hands had been used for scrubbing toilets and carrying trays. But tonight, as I typed command lines into the terminal of my battered laptop, my hands remembered who they really were. I wasn't near the waitress. I was near Reynolds, senior data architect and cybersecurity analyst. I watched the lines of code scroll down the screen. I was pinging the IP address I had memorized from the study. The screen flashed, request timed out. Request timed out. I sat back, frustrated. Of course it wouldn't be that easy. The server was air-gapped, meaning it wasn't connected to the internet. To access it, I couldn't just hack in from the outside. I needed a bridge. I needed a device authorized to talk to that server. I needed Damon's phone. I looked over at Leo sleeping in the big, cold bed. I thought about how Damon looked at him like an acquisition. I wouldn't let him turn my son into a lonely prince. I turned back to the screen. I dug through my old backpack and found a USB Wi-Fi adapter. I spent the next 4 hours writing a script that would turn my laptop into a digital sponge. If I could get close enough to Damon when he unlocked his phone, I could capture the digital handshake and trick the server into thinking my laptop was his device. The next morning, the house was buzzing with preparations for the gala. I took Leo to the kitchen. Damon was there, shouting into his phone about buying off a regulatory commission. He slammed the phone onto the counter and ignored Leo's attempt to say goodbye. As Leo left for school with the security guard, my heart ached. But then I saw it. Damon had turned away to yell at a chef, and his phone was sitting on the counter, unlocked. This was it. I had my laptop in my bag running the script. I needed 10 seconds. I walked toward the fruit bowl, inches from his phone. My heart hammered against my ribs. I reached for an apple, my other hand triggering the capture on my laptop. 5 seconds, I inspected the apple. I glanced at the phone's screen. It showed a text message that read, "Project Onyx Phase 2 is initiated, the leak is plugged." I filed the name Project Onyx away in my memory. 8 seconds. Suddenly, Damon turned around. He asked what I was doing. I jumped, dropping the apple. He accused me of hovering and snatched his phone back. He brushed past me, knocking my shoulder. I retreated to the guest house, shaking. I checked the log file. Capture complete. Handshake acquired. I had the digital key. When night fell, I sat on the floor of the guest house living room, closest to the wall shared with the main mansion. I executed the clone script. Connection established. I was in. I started navigating the file structure of Damon's private network. I went to the financials folder. I expected bank accounts, but instead I found folders for shell companies in the Cayman Islands. I opened a ledger. He was bleeding the company dry. King Tech was a Ponzi scheme. The cash reserves were empty. I kept digging. I found the folder labeled Project Onyx. I tried to open it, but a prompt appeared, access denied. Biometric scan required. I cursed. The sensitive files were locked behind a fingerprint scan. I couldn't get past that with code. I looked for other open folders and found one labeled assets. It wasn't financial assets, it was people. It was a list of names, board members, journalists, judges. I found a file on Judge Harris, the family court judge. It contained blackmail photos and records of bribes. Damon didn't just buy people, he owned them. Then I saw a name that made my blood run cold. Julian Thorne. Julian was my old boss, the man who ruined my life 3 years ago. I opened the file. It contained an email from Damon to Julian. The subject line read, "The Analyst." The email instructed Julian to destroy my credibility because I was asking too many questions about the algorithm. It said, "We can't let her find the bug in the source code." My breath hitched. It wasn't just a bad boss. It was Damon. He had ordered the hit on my career 3 years ago because I was getting too close to his secret. I slammed the laptop shut. The fear was gone. I stood up and looked in the mirror. I didn't see a tired waitress anymore. I saw a woman with nothing left to lose. He thought he was a predator. He didn't know he had locked himself in a cage with the one person who knew how to dismantle his life. But first, I needed to get into that Project Onyx folder. And to do that, I needed a fingerprint. I remembered the glass of scotch Damon had been drinking earlier. I tried to sneak out to the terrace to get it, but the head of security caught me. He sent me back to my room. I didn't get the glass. But as I walked away, I realized something. The gala was tomorrow night. Damon would be drinking, he would be distracted. I wouldn't just be a guest at the gala. I was going to be the most dangerous person in the room. The dress arrived at noon. It was delivered in a long black box tied with a silver ribbon, accompanied by a note from Vanessa. I opened the card, expecting an insult, and I wasn't disappointed. The note read, "Try not to look like you belong in the kitchen." I peeled back the tissue paper and pulled out the gown. It was a dull, shapeless thing, a heavy gray velvet that looked more like a curtain than a dress. It was high-necked, long-sleeved, and designed to make me disappear. It was a dress for a governess, for a ghost. Vanessa wanted me to fade into the background, to be the invisible woman she wished I was. I held the heavy fabric against my body and looked in the mirror. 3 years ago, I would have cried. I would have felt the sting of her classism and retreated, but I wasn't that woman anymore. I was a mother fighting for her cub, and I was a hacker planning a heist. I didn't need Vanessa's permission to shine. I walked to the sewing kit I had found in the guest house utility drawer. I didn't have a fashion degree, but I knew geometry. I knew angles. I laid the dress out on the floor and picked up the scissors. The sound of the shears cutting through the velvet was satisfying. It sounded like ripping up a contract. I cut the high neck down into a plunging V. I sliced the long, matronly sleeves off, turning them into sleek straps. I took the excess fabric and created a sash to cinch the waist, transforming the shapeless sack into a silhouette that hugged every curve. When I was done, it wasn't a gray curtain anymore. It was silver. It was steel. It was armor. I spent an hour on my hair and makeup. I swept my curls up into a high, intricate bun, exposing the line of my neck. I applied a dark, crimson lipstick that looked like war paint. I didn't have diamonds, so I wore nothing. My skin was the jewelry. I looked at myself in the full-length mirror. The waitress was gone. The victim was gone. Staring back at me was a woman who looked like she owned the building. I kissed Leo goodbye. The nanny, a stern woman Damon had hired that morning, was watching him. I had checked her background before she even walked in the door. She was clean, just expensive. I told Leo I would be back soon, that I was just going to a party downstairs. He looked at my dress and smiled, telling me I looked like a superhero. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I had to be a superhero tonight. I had to steal a fingerprint from a man who had security guards watching his shadow. I walked across the glass walkway toward the main house. The music was already drifting out into the night air, a live jazz band playing something smooth and expensive. The doors to the ballroom were open. I took a deep breath, centered myself, and stepped inside. The room was a sea of black tuxedos and glittering gowns. Waiters moved through the crowd with the same silver trays I used to carry. I felt a phantom ache in my arm, a memory of the wait. But tonight, my hands were empty. Tonight, I was a guest. I scanned the room for Damon. He wasn't hard to find. He was standing near the center of the room, holding court. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin, laughing at something a short, balding man was saying. Vanessa was clinging to his arm like a barnacle. She was wearing gold, dripping in sequins, trying desperately to be the brightest thing in the room. I began to walk toward them. I didn't rush. I moved with a slow, deliberate cadence. As I passed through the crowd, heads turned. I heard the whispers. People asked who the new executive was or if I was a model. They didn't recognize me. They didn't see the woman who had served them champagne 3 days ago. They only saw the confidence. I reached Damon's circle. Vanessa saw me first. Her smile froze. Her eyes went wide, scanning the dress, the hair, the exposed skin. She looked like she had swallowed a lemon. Damon turned to follow her gaze. For a second, the mask slipped. His eyes widened. He looked me up and down, and I saw a flicker of something that wasn't anger. It was shock, maybe even admiration. But he buried it quickly under his usual mask of cold indifference. He commented flatly that I had decided to join them and that I had altered the dress. I smiled, a sharp, dangerous thing, and told him it was a bit stifling, so I let it breathe. Vanessa recovered her voice and called my look aggressive. I ignored her and turned to the man Damon was talking to. It was Robert Sterling, the CFO. I extended my hand and mentioned I had heard so much about his creative accounting strategies. Sterling looked confused, but Damon stepped in, gripping my elbow firmly. He told Sterling I was making a joke and dismissed me to get a drink. I stayed by his side for the next hour. It was a torture test. I had to smile at people I despised. I had to listen to Vanessa make passive-aggressive comments about my background, but I was watching. I was watching Damon's hands. He was drinking scotch neat. He held the glass in his right hand, nursing it, taking slow sips. That glass was my target, but he never set it down. He held onto it like a lifeline. The opportunity came when the music changed to a waltz. Vanessa tugged on Damon's arm, demanding a dance for the photographers. He sighed, annoyed, and turned to set his glass down on a passing waiter's tray. I moved. I stepped seamlessly between Damon and the waiter. I said softly, "Allow me." Damon paused. He looked at me, holding the heavy crystal tumbler. For a moment, I thought he knew. The air between us crackled with tension. Then he shrugged and thanked me, handing me the glass. My heart stopped. I reached out. I had to be careful. I couldn't touch the spots where his fingers had been. I gripped the glass by the very top rim, my fingernails digging into the inside edge. I took it. The weight of it was heavy in my hand, warm from his palm. I told him to go dance. As he led Vanessa away, I turned and walked toward the ladies' room on the east side of the hall. I rushed to the furthest stall and locked the door. My hands were shaking. I pulled a small spy kit out of my clutch, a roll of clear packing tape and a square of dark contrast paper. I held the glass up to the light. There, near the bottom, was a perfect thumbprint. I carefully lifted the print with the tape and stuck it onto the dark paper. It was a perfect replica of Damon King's biometric signature. I wrapped it in a tissue and tucked it into my bra. I walked to the sink to wash my hands, staring at my dilated pupils in the mirror. I had done it. Suddenly, the door swung open. Vanessa walked in with two other socialites. She stepped in front of me, blocking the exit. She insulted my dress and poked me in the chest with a manicured nail, telling me I was a temporary problem and that once Damon got custody, I would be on the street. Something in me snapped. Not the cold snap from before, but a hot, protective rage. I grabbed her wrist. I leaned in close and whispered that she was worried about the wrong woman. I told her I didn't want her ring or her parties. I was a mother fighting for her child's life, and that made me more dangerous than she could imagine. I released her, leaving her looking shocked, and walked out. I slipped out of the ballroom, heading for the guest wing to verify the print. But as I walked across the dark glass walkway, I heard a vibration. It wasn't my phone. I stopped and looked around. Then my phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. I opened it. The message was a single image. It was a photo of the bathroom stall I had just been in, taken from above. The text underneath read, "Nice trick with the tape. We need to talk." My blood froze in my veins. Someone had seen me. I looked around the dark walkway. I was alone, but I wasn't. Someone was watching, and they knew exactly what I had done. I stared at the screen of my phone, the blue light illuminating the terror etched onto my face. The photo was grainy, likely taken from a hidden camera inside the ventilation vent. It showed me clearly the tape, the glass, the grim determination in my eyes. The text message underneath pulsated like a heartbeat. "Nice trick with the tape." "We need to talk." I didn't reply. I couldn't. If this was Damon, the game was over. I shoved the phone into my pocket and ran. I didn't care about the noise my heels made on the glass. I sprinted toward the guest wing, burst through the door, and slammed it shut, throwing the deadbolt and dragging a heavy armchair in front of it. I checked on Leo. He was still sleeping soundly. I kissed his forehead, whispering that I was doing this so he would never have to run. I went to the living area and pulled the blackout curtains shut. I retrieved the tissue, placing the piece of tape on my portable high-resolution scanner. I ran the software, tweaking the contrast until the ridges of the fingerprint stood out in stark black and white. I wrote a script to convert the image into a biometric data packet. Once the file was ready, I opened the tunnel to the server I had established the night before. The prompt blinked, "Biometric scan required." I uploaded the file. The progress bar crawled across the screen until finally, access granted. I was in. I was inside Project Onyx. I navigated through the folders. It wasn't just code, it was a history of theft. I found the core algorithm, but the metadata didn't match. The creation dates predated Damon's company, and the author's signature wasn't Damon King. It was M. Cole, Marcus Cole. I searched the name online. He was a brilliant coder who had vanished 5 years ago after a nervous breakdown. Suddenly, a terminal window popped up on my screen. It was a system alert warning that an unauthorized user had been detected. I reached for the power button, but text began to appear in the terminal. The unknown user wrote that I had good technique, but I had forgotten to mask my MAC address. I froze. This was the person who texted me, the watcher. I typed back, my hands shaking, asking who he was. He replied that he was the man who took the photo, the man who had been watching Damon King for 5 years. I asked if he was security. He wrote back that security was a blunt instrument. He claimed to be the ghost in the machine, the one who wrote the code I was looking at. I asked if he was Marcus. He confirmed it. He told me he had hacked the internal surveillance grid 6 months ago and had been waiting for a mistake. He didn't expect the opening to be a waitress with a talent for social engineering. Marcus told me that Damon stole everything from him, and now he was trying to steal everything from me. He warned me that I was playing a dangerous game. The fingerprint would get me into the files, but it wouldn't get me out of the house. He said Damon knew something was wrong and was moving the timeline. He told me to check the legal folder. I found a petition for emergency custody dated for tomorrow morning. It cited imminent danger to the child and mental instability of the mother. Attached were photos of me looking disheveled and a fake police report detailing a drug bust at my apartment that never happened. Damon was framing me. He wasn't going to wait. He was going to have me arrested at 9 in the morning. I typed back to Marcus, asking what I should do. He told me I couldn't fight Damon in court with fake evidence. I had to kill the company. I had the evidence of the stolen code. If we released that, his stock would go to zero. He would lose his leverage and the board would fire him. Marcus explained that the server was air-gapped, so I couldn't upload the data to the internet. I had to bring it to him physically. He had a contact at the Times to do a verified dump. I told him the gates were locked. He directed me to a service tunnel in the old wine cellar that led to the drainage output by the river. Then came the hardest choice. Marcus told me I had to leave Leo. He said if I took him through the sewer, we would be too slow and get caught. If I stayed, we both lost. If I went alone, I could destroy Damon and come back with the FBI. I stared at the blinking cursor, feeling sick. I couldn't leave my son in the lion's den. But Marcus insisted it was the only way and that I had to move now. I closed the laptop. I walked into the bedroom and knelt beside my sleeping son. I whispered that I loved him and promised to come back. I grabbed my bag, put the flash drive in my pocket, and changed into black leggings and a hoodie. I hid a note inside Leo's pillowcase telling him to be brave. I slipped out of the room and found the heavy oak door of the wine cellar. I descended the stairs, pushed aside a wire rack, and found the rusted grate. I crawled into the cold, wet tunnel, moving on my hands and knees for what felt like miles. Finally, I saw moonlight. I tumbled out onto the riverbank and scrambled up to the road where a gray sedan was waiting. Marcus was in the driver's seat. He looked at me, his face illuminated by the dashboard lights, and nodded at the mansion behind us. I told you in the text, nice trick with the tape, but now we have to move. I jumped in and told him to drive. As we sped away, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from the smart home app, motion detected in the guest room. Then a text from Damon arrived. It read, "I know you're gone, and you left the boy. You have 1 hour to bring back whatever you stole, or I let Vanessa discipline him." I screamed that he knew and that he had Leo. I begged Marcus to turn around. But Marcus gripped the steering wheel and shouted that if I went back now, Damon won. He would destroy the evidence, keep the boy, and I would go to jail. He said this was the only way. I sobbed, clutching the dashboard, tearing apart inside. My mother's instinct screamed to go back, but my brain knew Marcus was right. I choked out the words, "Drive fast." We raced toward the city's skyline as the sun began to rise. It was a race against time, a race for the truth, and a race for my son's life. The city skyline was a jagged set of teeth biting into the purple dawn as we sped toward the offices of the City Chronicle. Marcus drove with a white-knuckled intensity, weaving through the early morning delivery trucks and sanitation vehicles. I sat in the passenger seat, my body vibrating with a cocktail of adrenaline and terror. I clutched my phone like a talisman, staring at the timer I had set. 42 minutes. I had 42 minutes before Damon's deadline expired. 42 minutes before he unleashed whatever twisted punishment he had planned for my 6-year-old son. Every red light we hit felt like a physical blow to my chest. I wanted to scream, to kick the dashboard, to jump out and run, but I forced myself to breathe. Panicking would not save Leo. Destroying Damon King would. We screeched to a halt in front of the weathered brick building that housed the newspaper. It was a stark contrast to the glass and steel fortress I had just escaped. This place smelled of ink, diesel, and old coffee. Marcus swiped a key card at the side entrance, and we sprinted up 3 flights of stairs, bursting into a newsroom that was just waking up. Elena, the investigative journalist Marcus had trusted with his life, stood by a bank of monitors. She looked sharp, tired, and ready for war. I slammed the laptop onto her desk and plugged in the flash drive. My fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing the encryption I had set up for transport. I told her it was all here, the original source code, the proof that Marcus wrote it, and the financial records detailing the Ponzi scheme. The entire company was solvent only on paper. Elena's eyes widened as she scrolled through the documents. She whispered that this wasn't just fraud, this was grand larceny. I screamed that we didn't have 10 minutes. He had my son and had given me an hour. I needed the stock to tank. I needed the police to be swarming his gates. I needed him to lose everything in the next 30 minutes, or he was going to hurt my boy. Elena looked at the desperation in my eyes and nodded. She turned to her keyboard and typed furiously. She was pushing the story to the wire, blasting it to every financial news desk, going live with the headline, "The King's New Clothes: How Damon King Built an Empire on Stolen Code and Fraud." She hit the enter key. It was a small sound, a soft plastic click. But it was the sound of a guillotine blade dropping. I didn't wait to see the fallout. I snatched Marcus's keys from his hand. He tried to stop me, warning that the police were on their way and I should wait. I told him the police would take too long to get a warrant and that Damon was watching the clock. I jumped into Marcus's sedan and peeled away from the curb, ignoring the speed limit. As I drove back toward the estate, I turned on the radio. It took 8 minutes for the world to catch fire. The morning news anchor interrupted a weather report with a bulletin. Shockwaves in the tech world this morning as massive allegations of fraud rock King Tech. Stock prices were in freefall in pre-market trading. I turned the radio off. I needed to see his face when he realized he was mortal. I reached the gates of the King estate with 12 minutes left on the clock. The scene was already chaotic. News vans were parked on the grass, and paparazzi were shouting. The iron gates were sealed tight. I didn't stop. I floored the accelerator and smashed the car into the center seam of the gates. Metal screeched, glass shattered, and the airbag deployed, dazing me. I shoved the deflated bag aside and kicked the door open. The gates were bent, leaving a gap just wide enough for me to stumble through, ignoring the blood trickling down my forehead. Security vehicles raced toward me. The head of security jumped out, his hand on his holster. I walked right up to him. I was a foot shorter than him, but I had the truth. I told him to check his phone. I spat that King Tech stock just dropped 60%, the assets were frozen by the SEC, and Damon King was bankrupt. I told him he couldn't pay his pension and that he was holding a child hostage. I told him if he stopped me, he was an accomplice to kidnapping, but if he let me pass, he could tell the FBI he was cooperating. The guards behind him checked their phones, and the panic rippled through them. The head guard looked at the mansion, then back at me. Slowly, he took his hand off his weapon and stepped aside. He muttered that Damon was in the main hall and was losing it. I ran past them, up the marble steps, and pushed open the massive front doors. The house was silent, the silence of a tomb. The staff was gone, having fled the sinking ship. I walked toward the main living room. Vanessa was there, frantically shoving valuables into a duffel bag. She saw me and shrieked that I had ruined everything. She cried that Damon was crazy and she was leaving. She zipped up her bag and ran past me. I walked into the living room. Damon was sitting in the middle of the room on a single chair, the rest of the furniture overturned. Shattered glass littered the rug. He was holding Leo on his lap. Leo was crying silently, his face buried in Damon's chest. Damon's arm was wrapped too tightly around him. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot. He looked like he had aged 20 years in 2 hours. He told me I was late. I told him to let Leo go. He roared, standing up and dragging Leo with him. Leo whimpered in pain. Damon yelled that he still had the heir, the boy, and that he would trade him for immunity. I screamed that Leo was not a bargaining chip, he was his son. Damon called him an asset and reached into his pocket. He pulled out a lighter and held it up, threatening to burn everything down. Leo saw me and cried out, reaching his hand toward me. I kept my voice steady, telling Leo Mommy was here. I told Damon he was a coward, threatening to burn down his own house because he got caught. I told him the police were outside and the FBI was coming. I saw the moment his resolve broke. His shoulders slumped. The hand holding the lighter lowered slightly. I didn't wait. I lunged. I wasn't a fighter, I was a mother. I hit him with the force of a freight train, knocking the lighter from his hand. Damon stumbled back, losing his grip on Leo. I shouted for Leo to run to the door. Damon roared, grabbed my hair, and threw me onto the floor onto the broken glass. He loomed over me, his hands reaching for my throat, screaming that he had made me and I took it all away. His hands closed around my neck. I couldn't breathe. The edges of my vision turned gray. I groped blindly on the floor. My hand closed around the heavy crystal base of the whiskey decanter he had smashed earlier. I swung it with every ounce of strength I had left. The crystal connected with the side of his head. Damon's grip loosened. His eyes rolled back and he collapsed on top of me like a dead weight. I shoved him off, coughing, my throat burning. I looked at the man who had tried to buy my child. He looked so small now. Leo was standing in the doorway, trembling. I ran to him. I fell to my knees and wrapped my arms around him, burying my face in his neck. I cried for the fear, for the relief, for the nightmare that was finally ending. Sirens wailed, loud and close now. Heavy boots thundered in the hallway. Officers stormed the room. They saw me on the floor clutching my son. They saw Damon King, the billionaire genius, unconscious amidst the wreckage of his stolen empire. I didn't look up at them. I just held my son. I had walked into the lion's den and I had walked out. I had taken his money, I had taken his company, and I had taken his pride. But as I held Leo, I realized I had taken the only thing that actually mattered. I had taken back our future. The days following the arrest of Damon King were a blur of flashing cameras, aggressive lawyers, and the blinding fluorescent lights of police interrogation rooms. I sat in a plastic chair in the district attorney's office, watching the news on a mute television mounted in the corner. The image of Damon being shoved into a police cruiser, his tuxedo torn and his face bloodied, was playing on a loop. The invincible billionaire was gone. In his place was inmate 8940, a man facing charges of kidnapping, fraud, embezzlement, and assault. I spent the night sitting by Leo's bed in the safe hotel suite Marcus had arranged, making sure he was still there. He was resilient, my brave boy. He was already drawing pictures of the police officers who had saved the day. But the war wasn't over. King Tech was in a death spiral. With the revelation that the core technology was stolen and the profits were fabricated, the stock had become worthless. Trading was halted. The SEC was raiding the offices. The board of directors was scrambling, trying to salvage whatever scraps of value remained before the company was dissolved entirely. Marcus called. He confirmed the board was going to vote to liquidate, firing thousands of employees. He said he owned the code now, with the court validating his claim that morning, but he didn't want to run a company. He was a coder who liked the dark. I felt a flutter in my stomach, not of fear but of anticipation. Marcus was proposing a hostile takeover. I told him I was a waitress 3 days ago. Marcus corrected me. He said I was a waitress because the system was broken. He told me to put on a suit. I pulled out a navy blue power suit I had bought with emergency funds. I pulled my hair back into a tight, no-nonsense bun. I walked out of the hotel, ignoring the shouting paparazzi, and drove to the King Tech Tower. The lobby was chaos, but when I walked in, people stopped. They stared. I wasn't the invisible server anymore. I was the woman who had slain the king. I entered the executive boardroom. Robert Sterling, the CFO I had met at the gala, was there. I told him to sit down before the FBI arrived to arrest him. I stood behind Damon's empty chair. I addressed the board, telling them they were planning to liquidate, sell off the building for scrap, and fire 4,000 people. They claimed they had no choice since the company was built on fraud. I presented Marcus, who confirmed he was willing to license the code exclusively and transparently to King Tech, but he had conditions. Marcus said the company was more than one man. I stated the condition. Marcus would grant the license only if I was installed as interim CEO, effective immediately. A scoff came from the back of the room. A board member questioned my executive experience. I shot back my qualifications, my dual master's degree, my history as a senior architect, and the fact that I was the one who analyzed the ledgers and exposed the corruption that their auditors had missed. I slid a restructuring plan down the table. I told them the plan cut the bloat, eliminated fraud, saved 80% of the jobs, and restored public trust. I gave them a choice: vote no and the company goes bankrupt, your shares go to zero, and the DOJ investigates you for negligence. Or vote yes, save the company, and appoint me. The chairman of the board looked at the proposal, then at me, with a mixture of fear and respect. He asked for the vote. Every hand in the room raised. The chairman announced the motion carried and that I had the floor. I didn't smile, I just nodded. I told them to get out. Marcus stayed behind, smiling genuinely. He told me he would handle the engineering team and that I should handle the world. I walked around the table and sat in Damon's chair. I spun it around to face the window. The city lay spread out beneath me. The same city where I had struggled to pay rent. I picked up the desk phone. This is Nia Reynolds. Connect me to HR. We need to issue a press release. The next 6 months were the hardest of my life. I worked 18-hour days. I fired the sycophants. I hired back the people Damon had crushed. I testified against Damon in court, sitting just feet away from him as he wept and blamed everyone but himself. I watched as the judge sentenced him to 25 years without parole. I watched Vanessa accept a plea deal that stripped her of every dime she had married him for. The real victory wasn't in the courtroom. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the office reviewing the quarterly earnings. We were in the black, honest, clean profit. The door opened. I looked up. Leo ran into the room, his school backpack bouncing on his shoulders. He climbed into my lap and spun the CEO chair back and forth. He asked if we could get ice cream, saying I promised. I told him I did promise. I looked at the photo frame on my desk. It used to hold a picture of Damon shaking hands with a president. Now it held a drawing Leo had made, a picture of a rocket ship blasting off and 2 stick figures standing on the moon holding hands. I stood up, holding my son, and walked out of the office. I walked out of the building that used to be a fortress of lies and into the sunlight. Damon King had offered me $1 million to disappear. He thought he could write me out of the story. But he forgot one thing: you can't buy a soul. And you certainly can't buy a black woman who is fighting for her child. He wanted me to be a footnote. Instead, I became the headline. And that is how you topple a king. Nia didn't just survive, she rewrote the rules and built a future on her own terms. If Nia's journey from the catering hall to the CEO's office fired you up, please hit that like button. It helps more women find these stories of resilience. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you were in Nia's shoes? Would you have taken the money or fought back? I read every single comment. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a story of justice and redemption. Until next time, keep your head high and your crown straight.